My name is Karsten Witt. I'm the promoter of the concert on the 9th of May at the Philharmonie with the Hessische Rundfunk Symphony Orchestra Frankfurt. And I'm very happy that I can now speak to Brad Lubman, the conductor of this concert. Hi, Brad.
Hi, Karsten. Thanks for having me here.
First of all, about you and your relationship with this orchestra. The concert is in many respects, I think, a little bit unusual because you're not the chief conductor of this orchestra. Nevertheless, you're touring with this orchestra. We have concerts not only in Frankfurt, but also in Antwerp, in Berlin, and in Hamburg at the Philharmonie. So obviously the orchestra trusts you. How did it come?
The first orchestra in Germany I worked with was the Deutsche Symphony Orchestra Berlin. That was in 1996. And 1 week after I worked with them, I was at home and I got a fax, right? 1996, there was no email. I received a fax from the Hessische Rundfunk, which was in those days the Frankfurt Radio Symphony, asking if I would be available for a concert 1 year later. So that was 1997, and that was the first time I worked with the Hessische Rundfunk. I had a number of opportunities to work with them over the years. And of course, most recently was the Helmut Lachenmann birthday concerts when Lachenmann turned 80. And this program was enormous. I mean, we did not only several major Lachenmann works, but we did Ligeti, we did Schoenberg, 5 pieces for orchestra. And so they're a very, very facile, very flexible orchestra. Not only in the different kinds of repertoire they do, but when we work together, I think there's kind of a common working approach, which is not only one of accuracy and precision, but also efficiency, and I'd say sort of the highest level of musical integrity. So it's always a pleasure to work with the Hessische Rundfunk.
You know, the idea behind this new series, which we are starting with this concert, is that we do music from the last century. Actually, we call it masterpieces or master works of the 20th century. And I mean, there is quite some distance, I mean, time distance to some of this music. Like you mentioned, Messiaen, that's almost 70 years. So that's 2 generations. And still, you know, though Messiaen is, of course, a very famous composer, this work, Réveil des Oiseaux, is rarely played. So I think this is also quite unusual. And in any case, that's the main reason why we do it, that you do a program where you run no risk because, you know, nothing is unknown. And at the same time, we do something which is normally not done in normal orchestral concerts.
Well, it's an interesting thing when you talk about really when these works are from. Because yes, to some people, they would look at this program and say, oh, wow, it's all, you know, all new music or modern music. But let's face it, the newest piece is from 1996. Now, if you were born in 96 or around the mid 90s, you're somebody who's now in your mid to late 20s. So in terms of your perception of time, okay, that's a young, relatively young person. But if you're a little bit older, you say, no, something written in 1995, that's already a long time ago. So something written in 1953, 1979, it's all perception, it's all relative. So for some people, 1953, 1979, this is already, in a way, older music or old music or part of an established repertoire. You know, for some people, but, you know, we're thinking new music would be music written in the past, maybe 10 years, you know? So this in some ways is very old music. But for probably the public at large, maybe they've not heard any of these pieces in concert. Maybe they've heard, because these are things that you can hear on recordings. So maybe somebody who is an enthusiastic follower of the music of our time, perhaps they've heard these pieces on the recordings that exist, but have they heard these pieces in concert?
That's the reason why we do it, because we are convinced that this is fantastic music. And to start with this piece from 1996 by Augusta Reed Thomas. That's actually the composer whom you probably know best on a personal level. Yes, I understand. She told me that you just premiered a piece of her.
The Eastman School of Music is celebrating 100 years. And so we've commissioned a lot of composers for this season. And I commissioned Augusta Reed Thomas to write a piece for Musica Nova. But everybody calls her Gusty. So Gusty and I met in 1989. That's quite a while ago at the Tanglewood Festival, the Tanglewood Music Center. And she, in that time, was one of the composition fellows. I was the assistant conductor for Oliver Nussen, who was running the Contemporary Festival. And I was also one of the conductors conducting on the Contemporary Festival. So we go way back, and I've done a lot of pieces of hers, not only commissioned works, but for example, Words of the Sea, I conducted in Berlin, by the way, already in 2001, I think it was. I have to check my records. It was with the DSO Berlin. And pretty sure it was 2001. Of course, I know of all the composers, I know her the best. I mean, I never had the chance to meet Olivier Messiaen, and I never had the chance to meet Claude Vivier. I met George Crumb once, very briefly, about 20 years ago, but I knew his music very, very well because one of my percussion teachers, Ray DeRoche, was a very close associate of colleague of Crumb's, and Crumb dedicated pieces to Ray DeRoche, wrote a number of pieces where Ray DeRoche premiered them as a percussionist. I played a number of Crumb pieces as a percussionist. Crumb was a very important composer in general, of course, but also for percussionists. He wrote a lot for percussion.
Now, this is a very interesting program which we have because it's just in the middle, yeah? I mean, you can still ask, if you have a question about the score, you can still call Gusty, but the others you cannot ask anymore. But you can still ask people who have worked with them, for example. And so I wonder how it is. I mean, I just at the end of his life, I did meet Olivier Messiaen. I didn't talk about his scores with him, but it was very impressive to meet him as a person. But in our concert, of course, we have Pierre-Laurent Aimard, who knew him extremely well because he studied with his wife. And so he was at their home and he knew Olivier Messiaen already as a child. So I wonder, do you have any questions for Pierre-Laurent when you meet him?
Here's a question for Pierre-Laurent Aimard. In Messiaen, so many times you have these metronome, the numbers, the metronome mark. 16th note equals 176. And then you have 8th note equals, 114 or the quarter note. And sometimes the tempos are very close and sometimes they're not playable. I mean, in chronochromy, there are some tempos which are unbelievably fast if you really, really do what's printed. So do you go for the relative relationship between this tempo and the second tempo? That this says 168 and now this says, 104. Or do you go for the relative relationship, or do you go for the precision of the numbers, Or there's a third option, do you go with a descriptive, en peu lent, or presque vif, like how do we relate to those things? So it looks very precise, but at the same time, there's a kind of element of intuition that you need to have, and you have to also go with the text. Not the written text, but the musical meaning. Is this possible at this tempo on the piano, in the orchestra, on the piccolo, And then, of course, there's the written out bird, the bird song. He has the specific birds all identified. Now, does this mean that we should go and listen to field recordings of all the birds and say that, well, actually, a North American prairie chicken, if I heard a recording and it goes a little bit faster than what's written. I mean, as I said, I think there's a kind of point at which we take a logical, intuitive approach, and it's a combination of all the different variables that I just said. But this is something I'm going to be interested to ask.
Certainly nature plays a role in all these works, and this seems to be something which, you know, composers of all times have done, to bring natural sounds into the music, to imitate sounds from nature. And of course, you know, in a way, the music is also part of the acoustic environment in which we are circulating, and so it's of course also making people aware of, you know, there is something which we know already, you know, something common for everybody, I suppose. Or would you say there is, I mean, in case of Messiaen, it was much deeper, of course. For him, these bird songs were actually divine messages. I mean, he was a very religious man. So he, you know, he had really, he admired the birds as divine creatures.
Right.
And this, I think this aspect was very, very important for him.
Yes, very important and perhaps rather unique. You know, I mean, in his religiosity, I mean, you know, that, you know, it's almost like you could say, well, there were these two sides, right? There was the very, very religious side of Messiaen, and there was this devotion to nature, and particularly bird song. But then the fact that, yes, he saw the birds as these were divine messengers, it then all puts it in the same, you know, in the same package. But so, yeah, in some ways that makes him maybe stand out in a different way from the other composers. But, you know, Crumb, not that George Crumb spoke of religiosity in any way, but he did speak of this sort of mysteries of life, mysteries of nature, of places. And in a way, in some of Crumb's music, there's this kind of element, this ritual element. But then the element of ritual comes into the music of Vivier as well, you know. So maybe on some level, with this particular program, all the composers are kind of coming from a very similar, maybe it's not exactly the same, but very similar background. I mean, the music on this program is extremely colorful, extremely imaginative, and very evocative and provocative. You know, it evokes imagery, it evokes feelings, but it also provokes thought, whether it's in the direction of philosophy and religion, or nature and the mundane. And even if you don't get a sense of anything in the pieces beyond the surface, beyond the general sound, there's something extremely exhilarating, I think, and very imaginative and very, very, very colorful about these four particular pieces, but these four particular composers. There's something very connected about it. And I don't know if we had that in mind when we were first discussing the program. It was, the idea was the theme of nature. And it's very interesting how, and I find this with lots of programs, that when the pieces fall into place, sometimes there are things that are so connected that I don't think one could have thought of at the very beginning. You know, you have to do the work and the research, and you know, it is like a bit of a puzzle. You move the pieces around and you go, aha, here's this program. And then you look at it and you say, wow, look at how connected. Isn't that incredible?
Little bit like in a conversation, when you start a discussion with other people, you actually find that they are articulating things which you would have wanted to say, and they are able to say it, and to express it, and this is the way we are learning something and get into dialogue. And this is why we are actually looking forward to this concert. Thank you very much, Brett.
Thank you, Karsten. A great pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you soon.